Welcome back, Rainmakers, and to those joining us for the first time, step inside. This is where storms are born, where our stories drip with obsession, power, hunger and fates that were never meant to be gentle. Tonight I'm opening the gates to a new dark romance, a tale drenched in desire, danger, and a bond so feral it shakes an entire kingdom. In a world ruled by alphas and bound by ancient rites, one Lunar Queen stands untamed, and 7 powerful alphas have already tried and failed to claim her. But the greatest storm isn't the one they unleashed, it's the one still to come. If you're craving a story with secrets, heat, betrayal, and a love that rises from obsession itself, you are exactly where you need to be. Rainmakers, thank you for riding the thunder with me. And to our new listeners, tap that subscribe button, like this episode, and join the downpour. The more we grow, the wilder we can write, and the darker our storms can become. Settle in. Breathe slow. The first crack of lightning is about to strike. The throne room is a tomb pretending to be a palace. Torches gutter along the wolf-carved pillars, smoke curling like black ribbon up the vaults. The court has learned the art of silence at last. Even their fear keeps its head bowed. I kneel on cold stone with a crown in my hands and a cooling queen at my feet, and every heartbeat that isn't hers feels like theft. They will say I killed her. They have already begun to mouth it behind their sleeves, soft as prayers, greedy as gossip. They will not say the rest, that we burned together long before this night, that I walked into her storm and never found my way out again. Her hair spills over the steps like a dark river. The marks at her throat fade to pale crescents. I want to touch them, to press my thumb there and feel the echo of us, but the high priest has ringed her with ash and salt, and even grief must bow to ceremony. So I hold the crown and pretend I know how to breathe without her. Someone coughs. A counsellor. Another clears his throat. Their courage, such as it is, smells like old parchment. They expect me to speak. They expect a confession. They expect anything that lets them resume the old rituals of order and blame. Instead, I listen to the room the way I listen to her. Careful, hungry, reverent. The banners whisper, the torches sigh, the black stone hums with the memory of steps that were light, and then not. You were never light, I think. You were lightning. I close my eyes and the past lifts its head. Years ago, a hall bright with winter, music braided with power, the velvets and furs of 100 wolves making a red and silver sea. I was still a beta with clean hands then, invisible by design, the sort of man who could stand beside a pillar and learn more than kings ever hear from their thrones. I had come to spy, to measure, to file away strengths and weaknesses for a future that would suffer fools less than this one. And then she entered. Not like a queen, like a verdict. Jewels burned at her wrists, frost bloomed under her heels. She clapped once, and the music obeyed. Every alpha in the room tilted toward her, like iron to a star. I did not move. For the first time in a long life of discipline, I could not make my body obey me. She passed within an arm's length. The air changed. I could feel the shape of her attention without earning it. I could feel how the room made promises to her, and she accepted none. I thought I would forget my name before she reached the dais. You will break them, I thought. And you did. The present rushes back like cold water. I open my eyes. The crown bites my palm. The high priest clears his throat again, louder now, tasting the edge of accusation. Speak, Beta, he says. Tell us what you have done. I look at the salt circle and the woman inside it and think, everything. My fingers go numb around the crown. I set it gently on the step below her hand. The metal rings against stone, a thin, sad chime. Possessive grief is an ugly phrase and an honest one. I do not pretend I loved her purely. I loved her like a problem I wanted to own. I loved her like a blade I wanted to master. I loved her the way a drowning man loves the hand that pulls him deeper. I can hear her breath in memory, Not now. Then. A dim room? Not this one. Curtains breathing with the night wind. The sort of quiet that happens when two people are so close that even silence feels full. She was warm and furious and tired of being worshipped. I was steady and starving and tired of being good. When she looked at me, there was hunger and permission in the same glance. No trumpets, no choir, just two people and the voltage between them. Her hand at my jaw, mine at the curve of her waist. The first brush of mouth to mouth like a door opening where I had thought there was only wall. She tasted like heat. She moved with a command that asked a question and answered it in the same breath. She dragged a vow out of me without a word, and I gave it gladly. I remember the rhythm we found, the way the world narrowed to breath and sound and the cadence of us. No court, no crown, no winter, only the animal truth of yes. Even now, with her cooling on stone, the memory warms me and ruins me. My hands tremble. The court mistakes it for fear. Let them. One of her ladies-in-waiting sobs. A delicate sound, quickly smothered. I rise from my knees and the ring of guards tightens. I could laugh, as if I would flee, as if there is anywhere left to go that is not this room. Your Grace, says a counsellor, forcing steadiness into his voice like a bad actor. The succession. We'll wait, I say. The words are quiet and absolute. The guards shift their weight. The priest frowns. I do not raise my voice. I have never needed to. I walk down from the dais. Each step is a sentence. Each sentence is an indictment. The old ways carved wolves long before they carved crowns. I know where the secrets are kept. I know the weight of the key. We pass the great doors where the 7 banners hang. 7 colours, 7 houses, 7 men who entered the ritual chamber certain of victory and left with their certainty in pieces. The court will pretend their defeats were accidents of temperament, mismatches of temper. They will tell themselves stories that make sense on paper. They will call her a trial instead of a woman. I remember their faces. I remember how some learned reverence and how some learned fear. I remember how the brave ones stayed a heartbeat longer when the pressure rose, and how even the bravest could not breathe in her storm for long. Her storm, mine. At the end of the corridor, the stone narrows to a throat, and beyond it lies the archive. Cold air, iron smell, wax and leather, and the dust of old prayers. The guard at the door bows and does not meet my eye. Good. Let the rumours grow teeth. On the far wall beneath the carved moon, there hangs a ledger wrapped in wolfskin and sealed in red. The old rites, the laws no one admits they still follow. The steps that unmade the timid and unveiled the true. My hand pauses above the seal. I can feel the room watching me even here, an echo of the court's appetite. What they want is a neat explanation. What they will get is a map of a ruin. I rest my forehead against the cool stone and speak to the woman who cannot answer. They will say, I killed you. They will never understand how we lived. Memory rises again, unbidden. Not the first touch this time, not the soft entry to a blaze. Another night, later, when we were both already marked and ungentle with our need. The kind of night that thrown knives call a game. We did not speak much. We did not need to. She took and I took, and there was no tally between us, only a long, low insistence that made time itself go obedient. I remember the grip of her, the way she met me and matched me and then pushed, the way she demanded I be more than loyal, demanded I be hers. I remember the sound she made when I obeyed. I remember thinking, this is how kingdoms are kept, this is how they end. The wax seal cracks under my thumb, a small, sharp sound. The wolfskin loosens. The ledger is older than the crown and more honest. Its pages smell like smoke and iron and the hands of 100 sinners. I carry it to the table and set it down like an offering. A tremor runs through the floor. Far away, a door opens. Perhaps the court has found its courage or its need. It doesn't matter. They can have both. I have this. The first page is a warning in a careful hand, the former king's script, the man who woke her storm and called it love. I'm not interested in his warning. I want his instructions. I want the names of those who tried before me and the reasons they failed. I want the rights no priest will say aloud. I want the truth I already know and the language to pin it down. I will not give them our secrets, not all, but they will have enough. Enough to understand that she did not break 7 alphas by accident. Enough to understand that a beta can become the sharpest thing in the room when he stops pretending he's safe. I turn the page. Ink gleams. The old script curls like smoke. Behind my ribs, something finally settles. Not peace, not yet. A vow taking shape. If she is gone, and she is, then the story of us will not be written by cowards. If they call me murderer, they will do it with the truth in their mouths. If they call me king, they will learn what a king is for. I set my palm on the parchment. The words bite like teeth. The past opens its jaws. Let them ask for confession. I will give them a ledger, and I will begin. The ledger's first page glares up at me like a witness. Ink braided into law, law braided into hunger. Outside the archive door, footsteps gather and scatter, courtiers orbiting grief like moths that don't understand flame. I turn another page. Dust rises, old and faithful. The former king's neat hand records a name. Kyle of the Red Veil. The Lion. In the present, the council tries courage again. A fist knocks once against the iron. Another voice hisses, urgent. Succession, rights, stability. I make them wait. Her ring sits in my palm, a moon of cold metal. I rub my thumb over it until the chill bites my skin. They want a name. I give them silence. The ledger offers me memory. I take it. Kyle arrived the way summer does, loud, golden, and persuaded of his own inevitability. The hall roared when he appeared, banners drowning in his colour. Mothers lifted children to see him. Warriors straightened. Servants smiled before they knew why. He was built of charisma and victories, maned with easy triumph. He had never met a locked door that did not love the sound of his step. He bowed to the Queen, and the bow looked like a performance for the watching world. He promised to be gentle with power and thorough with pleasure. He promised to restore order to the realm and to the woman who ruled it. He promised in the way men promise when they don't understand the thing they want. She watched him the way a blade watches a throat. Ritual calls for witnesses. I stood among the shadows with my hands behind my back and my heart standing forward like a soldier. The old ways were observed. Incense, salt, a circle scribed so thin it looked like a whisper. The priest muttered his little prayers, hoping someone important was listening. The door closed. The court leaned in against the wood as if they could drink what would happen. I leaned away. I already knew thirst. Inside the chamber, heat lived in the walls. Not candle heat, not fire. The other kind, the press of breath and will, the ache that begins as a suggestion and ends as a law. Kyle smiled like a man stepping into warm water. He reached for her. She did not step back. She did not step forward. She simply existed, and the air altered its shape. He touched her wrist, slow, courtly, and the pulse there answered like a drum. He lifted her hand to his mouth, and the quiet in the room deepened. He said her name with that voice of honey and sunlight. She allowed it to sweeten nothing. When she looked at him, something shifted under his skin. I watched pride recognize a rival. It was the first true thing that happened to him that night. The first act of the rite is always a dance. Not the clumsy circle our nobles learn, not the peasant reels thrown into festivals like bone to hounds. This is the kind that teaches two bodies to speak the same grammar. Kyle began with charm, smooth and practiced. She mirrored him once, twice, then altered the step by a fraction. His smile flickered and returned, a candle steadying. He adjusted, generous. She altered again, smaller this time, almost nothing, the shadow of a change. He followed, still smiling. still master of every room, even this one. Then she changed nothing at all, and he lost the beat. A breath caught in his throat. He flushed as if a hand had pressed heat into his chest. The chamber's air thickened to a velvet weight. The incense burned sweeter, too sweet. Kyle blinked. He tried a new flourish, a crowd pleaser. She did not care. She let him perform and remained the axis he orbited without touching. He began to sweat. It looked becoming on him. The second act of the rite is permission. She had given none, not yet. He moved closer, asking without words. She granted him a half step, and the gift almost made him stumble. He swallowed like a man tasting thunder. When his mouth found hers, it was triumphant, sure, the kiss of a king in rehearsal. It did not stay that way. She closed her hand at the back of his neck, not hard, not soft. She guided his triumph into something focused. His breath changed. The room listened to the new rhythm and adjusted around it. She did not move much. She did not need to. She sharpened him with stillness. His hands wandered, then learned discipline. His mouth learned patience. He tried to lead. She allowed it for a count of 5, then took the lead back with the casual authority of a monarch reclaiming a throne. He made a sound, small at first, then not. I have watched men break. It is rarely one crack. It is a spidering, a network of fine fissures under a smile. Kyle smiled like a god blessing his subjects, while his knees remembered how to bend. She pressed him without force. The pressure came from everywhere else, the air, his blood, the circle's thin line, the knowledge that she had allowed him inside the ritual and could deny him with a breath. He was not in danger of harm. He was in danger of truth. He whispered something into her shoulder, some vow sculpted for audiences. It came out wrong. She answered with silence that felt like a hand on the back of his head. He obeyed it. The cadence turned molten. Time learned obedience in that room. He tried to set the pace. She took the pace and braided it with her own, until his belonged to her. He tried to prove endurance. She taught him that endurance is not the same as surrender. He tried to worship. She showed him that worship without listening is noise. He tried to be lion. She made him remember he was also wolf. He knelt because the ritual asked for it. He stayed kneeling because she did. It was not cruelty. It was an education. She took the bright falsehood of his certainty and burned it down to something honest. He reached for her with hands that shook, and she took his wrists and let him feel the tremor as if it were a lesson carved into his bones. He said please without saying the word. She gave him a fraction, and the fraction was everything. He bowed his head into the curve of her body like a pilgrim who finally found the road meant for his feet. Outside, the court waited for a roar. Inside, the music was breath and the sound a man makes when his pride shatters beautifully. The heat in the room stopped pretending to be anything but need. The pattern of their bodies said yes and yes again. She drove him to the edge of his certainty and let him look down. He looked. He did not jump. He fell. I could hear it in him the moment the hunger took command. It wasn't hers. It was his, turned honest by proximity to power. His hands softened, then steadied. His mouth stopped performing and started learning. For a heartbeat, I almost believed he might survive her. Then the pressure rose the way the sea rises, inevitable and crushing and holy. Kyle's shoulders bowed. He reached for control the way drowning men reach for sky. She didn't push him under. She simply didn't hold him up. The circle's thin edge cut like an idea. He tried to breathe. The room said later. He tried to stand. The right said no. When he yielded, fully, finally, the grace of it was almost beautiful. He gave her everything he thought he possessed and found out it had never been his. She took what was offered and what was real. The chamber pulsed around them, a tide at full moon. He trembled with it. He broke in a way that left him more honest than he had ever been. The ritual ended when she looked away. That was all. She simply withdrew her attention, and the sea receded. Kyle swayed, emptied and altered. He kissed her hand, and his lips shook. He opened the door to the corridor with eyes that could not meet the crowds. The roar he had promised never came. A hush did. He walked through it like a man forgiven and ashamed. The court tried to tell itself a story of gentleness. The priest wrote a line about divine temperance. Children whispered that the queen was merciful. I watched her leave the chamber with a distant, quiet hunger banked behind her gaze, and I understood something the rest of them would choke on if they tasted it. She was not cursed, she was awakened. Back in the present, a counsellor shouts through the iron as if volume were virtue. "Name the successor," he demands. "Name the line, or we will." I slide her ring onto my finger. It sits loose as if refusing to belong to anyone else. I walk from the archive into a corridor lined with carved wolves and history too proud to dust itself. When I open the door, the council recoils as if grief were contagious. The chamber's light hits me like the memory of heat. "Soon," I say, "when the rites allow it." "The rites?" the high priest snaps. "Which rites?" "The old ones," I answer, and watch him pale. I return to the ledger while their outrage ripples outward, petty and loud. The next pages are lean with notations no priest admits reading, margins scribbled with cautions and costs, reagents and timings, half-truths in careful script. And then a word I have never seen recorded outside rumour draws a clean line under what I intend to become. Scent mask. The text describes it clinically. A forged signature in the air, a skin-deep lie to coax a door that would otherwise remain closed. Dangerous. Temporary. Prohibited by councils that only prohibit what works. It demands a keepsake, a drop of blood, and a vow that is not spoken aloud. My thumb rests on the margin. The page waits for my breath to steady. Kyle had the whole realm cheering for him, and the storm ate him anyway. The others would come. Clever, brutal, tender, holy, and they would learn names for fear they'd never needed. If she was awakened, she deserved someone who could carry the fire with her. If the world would only let alphas try, the world would have to be fooled. I close the ledger. The wax seal lies broken on the table like a red tear. In my palm, her ring warms slowly, as if my skin could convince metal to remember the sun. The council calls my name again, a chorus without melody. I ignore them the way the sea ignores pebbles. Somewhere in the palace, a witch who hates me owes me nothing. Somewhere in my rooms, a ribbon waits that still remembers her pulse. Somewhere in the shape of my future, a lie is sharpening itself into truth. I start to plan. Morning drags itself across the windows like a wounded thing. Her ladies kneel around the stone, wrists shaking, eyes swollen. One of them, Nara, the steadier one, reaches to straighten the wrap at the queen's hand and goes still. "There," she whispers. "What is that?" I don't have to look. I already know. But I do, because performance is a language. On the inside of her wrist, where delicate veins used to sprint like blue threads, a brand hides under fading skin, a crescent wrought within a circle, thin lines etched so fine they look like breath caught in glass. The former king's mark, meant to be invisible unless heated by fever or fury. He called it blessing, we called it nothing at all. An old sigil, I say, soft, for protection. Nara swallows. Protection failed. Protection fails for the living, I answer. For the dead, it is only a memory. I touch the edge of the brand with 2 fingers as if checking for a pulse, then draw the wrap back in place and bind it with the ribbon I should have returned months ago. The room exhales, relieved to have an explanation that hurts less than the truth. I stand. My lie stands with me. They ask more questions, small and human. I give them answers, small and human. When they finally leave, I shut the doors with care, and the echo is an accusation. My hands smell like ash and rosewater. My mind smells like the page where her husband wrote the steps that woke her hunger and named it love. The ledger waits on the table in the archive. The ink is patient. I am not. Rian of Coldmere, the scholar. He put his cleverness on like armour. He arrived with ledgers of his own, little leather books filled with charts and timings and notes in tight, disciplined script. He had learned techniques in foreign houses, breath patterns, pressure sequences, the mathematics of want. He had catalogued the routes through pleasure as if it were a city, and he the only man who could read maps. Before the ritual, he smiled at the Queen with the grave tenderness of a curator approaching a priceless thing. He did not underestimate her. He numbered her. In the chamber, incense coiled in pale threads. Rian inhaled once, twice, measured the air, adjusted his stance. He placed his hands exactly where 1,000 diagrams said they should go. He asked permission in the precise pause where permission is given. She granted it with a look. He began hot, no gentle prelude. He believed momentum was mastery. His mouth was sure, his hands confident, his body a metronome. He counted her breaths against his, tallied shivers, plotted changes. When she altered speed, he matched instantly. When she stilled, he steadied, exquisite as steel. For a handful of seconds, it worked. The ritual hummed like a machine tuned by the gods. Then she tilted the world by a hair and every number fell off the page. It was nothing dramatic, no gasp, no cry. She simply refused to be a sum. Her attention sharpened to a point and landed on him like a nail through parchment. Rian's rhythm faltered, not outwardly. He was too trained for that, but underneath, where pulse meets pride. I watched the flicker in his eyes. Recalculation. He tried a different sequence, a foreign pattern meant to seize command of a partner's breath. She let him take exactly as much as she wanted him to have, which is to say, none. The air thickened, sweetening to something like ripe fruit left in the sun. He frowned, minute, elegant, and adjusted again. She adjusted nothing. He was fast. She was immediate. He leaned into intensity. She received it the way a sea receives a stone, generous and unmoved, except where she chose to break around him. He pressed for advantage, and she taught him that advantage is a story men tell when they are afraid to say surrender. His notes, those careful little maps, might as well have been prayers to a god who does not answer. He came close, so close. For a breath, he stepped into her weather and found a current that carried him exactly where he intended. I saw his jaw ease. I saw the scholar believing he'd solved the problem. She smiled. Not unkindly, as a teacher smiles when a student finally asks the right question. Then she changed the answer. The pressure surged from a place no chart could measure. Not louder, denser. Rian startled, eyes darkening as something ancient touched the edge of him and pressed. He tried to hold tempo. She took tempo and rewrote it inside him. He tried to lead. She let him, for half a heartbeat, and then shifted the floor. The metronome in him stuttered. The air tasted like storm. He was beautiful in the split second before the fall, composed, brilliant, proud. Then the math burned away and left a man on fire. His hands changed first, less clever, more honest. His mouth lost its angles and found confession. The breath he'd been counting became a thread he followed deeper than he meant to go. He made a sound that belonged to no language he'd studied. The diagram low in his spine curled into ash. She didn't overwhelm him by force. She unmade his map. Every route he thought would bring him to mastery led him instead to a cliff, and below the cliff was not failure, but her. When he understood that, when understanding became need, the scholar stopped being a scholar and became a pilgrim. He tried one last gambit, precision's final prayer. He set a pattern meant to draw surrender from a partner like water from a well. She gave him water, and then the well, and then the river, and then the flood. He drowned beautifully. Outside, the court murmured that the learned were safest. Inside, intelligence discovered what instinct had always known. Some fires are not solved, only survived. Ryan's back bowed. His voice broke into breath. He followed her pace because it was the only pace left. He gave up trying to be right and became true. The ritual ended on its own, the way storms do when they've said everything. Ryan stood, or tried to. His legs forgot the trick of it for a moment. He kissed her wrist with the care of a man returning a sacred thing to its altar and whispered thank you like an apology. When he opened the door, he did not meet anyone's eyes. He kept his notebooks, but not his old certainty. He left a smarter man. I watched all of it from the shadow where betas are supposed to live. Something in me shifted soundlessly, like a blade turned in the light. Worship is safe at a distance, rule is not. I stopped pretending I wanted to be the quiet mind in the corner. I wanted the storm, teeth and all. Back in the present, I closed the ledger. The brand on her wrist burns in my memory like a second sun. The former king wrote pages about awakening and named me unworthy without ever using my name. Perhaps he was right, then. I leave the archive through a servant's passage. The palace is half awake, courtiers speaking in dried-out voices, guards tasting rumours with their eyes. I move through them the way a knife moves through silk, down one stair, then another, into the underbelly where the stone sweats and the lamps burn blue. She hates me, the witch I'm going to see. Hates me for a thing I did years ago that saved a life she'd priced for profit. I took the profit and left her the life. She does not forgive debts that pay in breathing. Her door is a scar in the wall. I knock. It knocks back. When it opens, smoke rolls out with the perfume of violet and iron. She's smaller than her reputation and more dangerous than her eyes. She smiles like a wound. You, she says, the obedient one who isn't. I need a scent, I answer. An alpha's. And you're not, she says, amused. Oh, little knife, at last. I can pay. You will, she says, but not in coin. Behind her, glass jars catch the lamplight, bottled shadows, pressed night, a hurricane of dried petals. A ribbon hangs from a nail, black silk, worn soft by a pulse I know better than my own. The witch follows my gaze and grins. Bring me a keepsake, she purrs, and a drop of what you won't admit you'd bleed for. I'll make you a lie that clings like truth. I think of the brand on the Queen's wrist. I think of Kyle's broken smile and Ryan's drowning grace. I think of the ring cooling on my finger and the court howling for names as if names ever saved anyone. Tomorrow, I say. Tonight, she corrects, pleased. Storms don't wait. I step inside, and the door seals like a promise. Morning drags itself across the windows like a wounded thing. Her ladies kneel around the stone, wrists shaking, eyes swollen. One of them, Nara, the steadier one, reaches to straighten the wrap at the Queen's hand and goes still. There, she whispers. What is that? I don't have to look. I already know. But I do, because performance is a language. On the inside of her wrist, where delicate veins used to sprint like blue threads, a brand hides under fading skin. A crescent wrought within a circle, thin lines etched so fine they look like breath caught in glass. The former king's mark, meant to be invisible unless heated by fever or fury. He called it blessing. We called it nothing at all. An old sigil, I say soft, for protection. Nara swallows. Protection failed. Protection fails for the living, I answer. For the dead, it is only a memory. I touch the edge of the brand with 2 fingers as if checking for a pulse, then draw the wrap back in place and bind it with the ribbon I should have returned months ago. The room exhales, relieved to have an explanation that hurts less than the truth. I stand. My lie stands with me. They ask more questions, small and human. I give them answers, small and human. When they finally leave, I shut the doors with care, and the echo is an accusation. My hands smell like ash and rosewater. My mind smells like the page where her husband wrote the steps that woke her hunger and named it love. The ledger waits on the table in the archive. The ink is patient. I am not. Rian of Coldmere, the scholar. He put his cleverness on like armour. He arrived with ledgers of his own, little leather books filled with charts and timings and notes in tight, disciplined script. He had learned techniques in foreign houses, breath patterns, pressure sequences, the mathematics of want. He had catalogued the routes through pleasure as if it were a city, and he the only man who could read maps. Before the ritual, he smiled at the Queen with the grave tenderness of a curator approaching a priceless thing. He did not underestimate her, he numbered her. In the chamber, incense coiled in pale threads. Ryan inhaled once, twice, measured the air, adjusted his stance. He placed his hands exactly where 1,000 diagrams said they should go. He asked permission in the precise pause where permission is given. She granted it with a look. He began hot. No gentle prelude. He believed momentum was mastery. His mouth was sure, his hands confident, his body a metronome. He counted her breaths against his, tallied shivers, plotted changes. When she altered speed, he matched instantly. When she stilled, he steadied, exquisite as steel. For a handful of seconds it worked. The ritual hummed like a machine tuned by the gods. Then she tilted the world by a hair and every number fell off the page. It was nothing dramatic, no gasp, no cry. She simply refused to be a sum. Her attention sharpened to a point and landed on him like a nail through parchment. Ryan's rhythm faltered, not outwardly. He was too trained for that. But underneath, where pulse meets pride. I watched the flicker in his eyes. Recalculation. He tried a different sequence, a foreign pattern meant to seize command of a partner's breath. She let him take exactly as much as she wanted him to have, which is to say, none. The air thickened, sweetening to something like ripe fruit left in the sun. He frowned, minute, elegant, and adjusted again. She adjusted nothing. He was fast. She was immediate. He leaned into intensity. She received it the way a sea receives a stone, generous and unmoved except where she chose to break around him. He pressed for advantage, and she taught him that advantage is a story men tell when they are afraid to say surrender. His notes, those careful little maps, might as well have been prayers to a god who does not answer. He came close, so close. For a breath, he stepped into her weather and found a current that carried him exactly where he intended. I saw his jaw ease. I saw the scholar believing he'd solved the problem. She smiled, not unkindly, as a teacher smiles when a student finally asks the right question. Then she changed the answer. The pressure surged from a place no chart could measure. Not louder, denser. Ryan startled, eyes darkening as something ancient touched the edge of him and pressed. He tried to hold tempo. She took tempo and rewrote it inside him. He tried to lead. She let him, for half a heartbeat, and then shifted the floor. The metronome in him stuttered. The air tasted like storm. He was beautiful in the split second before the fall, composed, brilliant, proud. Then the math burned away and left a man on fire. His hands changed first. Less clever, more honest. His mouth lost its angles and found confession. The breath he'd been counting became a thread he followed deeper than he meant to go. He made a sound that belonged to no language he'd studied. The diagram low in his spine curled into ash. She didn't overwhelm him by force. She unmade his map. Every route he thought would bring him to mastery led him instead to a cliff, and below the cliff was not failure, but her. When he understood that, when understanding became need, the scholar stopped being a scholar and became a pilgrim. He tried one last gambit, precision's final prayer. He set a pattern meant to draw surrender from a partner like water from a well. She gave him water and then the well, and then the river, and then the flood. He drowned beautifully. Outside, the court murmured that the learned was safest. Inside, intelligence discovered what instinct had always known. Some fires are not solved, only survived. Ryan's back bowed. His voice broke into breath. He followed her pace because it was the only pace left. He gave up trying to be right and became true. The ritual ended on its own, the way storms do when they've said everything. Ryan stood, or tried to. His legs forgot the trick of it for a moment. He kissed her wrist with the care of a man returning a sacred thing to its altar and whispered thank you like an apology. When he opened the door, he did not meet anyone's eyes. He kept his notebooks, but not his old certainty. He left a smarter man. I watched all of it from the shadow where betas are supposed to live. Something in me shifted soundlessly, like a blade turned in the light. Worship is safe at a distance. Rule is not. I stopped pretending I wanted to be the quiet mind in the corner. I wanted the storm, teeth and all. Back in the present, I closed the ledger. The brand on her wrist burns in my memory like a second sun. The former king wrote pages about awakening and named me unworthy without ever using my name. Perhaps he was right then. I leave the archive through a servant's passage. The palace is half awake, courtiers speaking in dried-out voices, guards tasting rumours with their eyes. I move through them the way a knife moves through silk. Down one stair, then another, into the underbelly where the stone sweats and the lamps burn blue. She hates me, the witch I'm going to see. Hates me for a thing I did years ago that saved a life she'd priced for profit. I took the profit and left her the life. She does not forgive debts that pay in breathing. Her door is a scar in the wall. I knock. It knocks back. When it opens, smoke rolls out with the perfume of violet and iron. She's smaller than her reputation and more dangerous than her eyes. She smiles like a wound. You, she says, the obedient one who isn't. I need a cent, I answer. An alpha's. And you're not, she says, amused. Oh, little knife. At last. I can pay. You will, she says, but not in coin. Behind her, glass jars catch the lamplight, bottled shadows, pressed night, a hurricane of dried petals. A ribbon hangs from a nail, black silk, worn soft by a pulse I know better than my own. The witch follows my gaze and grins. Bring me a keepsake, she purrs, and a drop of what you won't admit you'd bleed for. I'll make you a lie that clings like truth. I think of the brand on the Queen's wrist. I think of Cale's broken smile and Ryan's drowning grace. I think of the ring cooling on my finger and the court howling for names as if names ever saved anyone. Tomorrow, I say. Tonight, she corrects, pleased. Storms don't wait. I step inside, and the door seals like a promise. The witch's smile sharpened as the door sealed behind me, teeth catching lamplight like little knives. Bottles chimed against one another in a draught that shouldn't exist, glass throats whispering to glass throats. I stood in the middle of her den and let the scents sort themselves. Iron, violet, storm rind, burnt sugar. Behind her, a ribbon slept on a nail, as if it had never known a pulse. Come back when you're ready to bleed for it, she had said. I left her to her jars and climbed into a palace that was trying to decide whether to keep pretending it had a queen. They were waiting for me like a verdict. The council chamber smelled of quill ink and cheap courage. 3 men, 2 women and a priest who wore his fear like a jewelled collar. A roll of parchment lay in the centre of the table, speared by a wax seal that had not been blessed by any hand that mattered. You forged decrees, the oldest councillor said without prelude. During her heats, appointments, provisions, tariffs, signed with her ring, witnessed by no one. I reached into my coat and set the ring on the table. It looked small there, a moon that had fallen out of orbit. I signed what she would have signed, I said. You were busy trembling. The priest flushed. Blasphemy, he breathed, grateful to have found a word strong enough to hide behind. Accuracy, I corrected. The youngest councillor tapped the parchment with a trembling finger. This law reassigns a garrison. It moves men we cannot spare. It spares men you cannot move, I said, and watched comprehension arrive late and ashamed. They didn't like the way I stood in my own shadow without apology. They didn't like that I didn't beg. They didn't like that grief had not made me small. Until a successor is named, the priest said, gathering himself. You answer to us. Until a successor is named, I said. I answer to the kingdom. The argument rose and fell around me, thin as a tide with no moon. I let it wash. There are moments to fight and moments to remember why you're willing. I remembered Tor. He came to the ritual chamber like a storm that did not know what it owed the sea. Everything about him was built for impact. Shoulders like siege towers, hands that had learned too many lessons at the wrong schools. Scar across the jaw, not the kind you get from defending, the kind you get from insisting. He wore his pelt half off his shoulders, as if the room needed to see what power looked like without adornment. He bowed to the Queen because the script required it. The bow said, I bend only before I break you. Ritual marks were drawn. Incense laid down a path the way a river lays down a bed. The circle's thread gleamed around them like a blade turned flat. I took my place in the hush and counted heartbeats I pretended were mine. Tor did not ask permission. He took it, or thought he did. He moved with the blunt certainty of a hammer used to discovering nails. His mouth was an order. His hands were instructions. He pulled her close the way warriors pull an enemy inside the arc of a blade to finish it. She let him. There is a way certain men touch that is all noise. She turned his noise into music simply by not yielding to it. Tor's roughness hit a wall that did not bruise. He found muscle where he expected meekness, iron where he expected silk. He pressed, and the room pressed back, a pressure that came from her body and not at all from it, the kind that teaches a man about gravity. He snarled, pleased. At last a threat, his shoulders said. At last sport, his breath said. He increased force like a soldier climbing a ladder toward the breach. She moved almost not at all. She set pace with the angle of her chin, with the weight of her gaze, with a small shift of her hips that said this much and no more. He tried to take more. The air narrowed like a doorway. I watched something in him flicker, the smallest lantern in a deep cave. For a heartbeat, his eyes went unfocused, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. He recovered with a growl, added heat to heat, dared her to meet him in the place where rage crowns itself king. She met him. And then she did something worse. She did not meet him. She held, she received, she endured without breaking. She fed back to him exactly what he gave, purified of swagger, stripped of performance. Every roughness he offered came back shaped into a request. He didn't understand at first. Violence taught him that the only way forward was through. He pushed, and the push became a plea. He quickened, and the quickening became a question. He tried to make her a field to be taken. She made him a banner carried by hands steadier than his. His breathing lost the martial cadence and found confession. The growl dropped out of his voice and revealed a sound older than rage. He reached for her throat as if to collar. She tilted her chin like a queen being adorned. He froze there, a great beast caught in the first tender trap of his life. Her hand rose, slow, sure, and set itself at the back of his neck, not command and not mercy, a weight that said here. He shuddered, the kind of shudder that rewrites a man. Brutality is a kind of prayer. Most men don't admit that. Tor had been praying with his fists for years, asking for someone to be larger than the storm inside him. She answered. He tried to crush her will. She let him discover he had brought his own to be broken. The room's heat turned solemn. It wasn't a blaze. It was an altar. Tor's force melted into obedience without humiliation, the way iron becomes a blade in the right fire. He leaned into her like a ship learning its wind. She guided him with a breath, with the press of fingers interlacing until his hand learned the shape of gentleness by wearing it. She slowed him, and the slowing did not diminish. It deepened. She quickened him, and the speed did not scatter. It aligned. He got what he thought he wanted. Control. Only it belonged to her, and felt like peace. For the first time in his loud life, silence welcomed him. He bowed his head against her shoulder and hid his face the way warriors hide their children from war. She didn't comfort him. She kept him. There is a difference. Outside, somewhere, soldiers were teaching recruits to shout. Inside, a man built to shout learned that power is the hand that doesn't shake. Consent ran through the scene like water through root. Even when his old habits tried to wake and insist, she set the terms without speaking, and he met them, grateful, bewildered. He trembled on the brink of the old violence and did not leap. He leaned instead. He stayed. When the rite ended, he didn't stand. He didn't move at all until she lifted his face with a single finger and gave him back to himself. He wept without sound, the way stone must weep in the dark when no one's listening. He left the chamber with his shoulders lower, his steps careful, as if the world had grown holy and he feared breaking it. I left the memory and found the council still arguing about ink. I had stopped worshipping the day Ryan drowned. Today I stopped pretending force impressed me. Power isn't louder, I thought, and Tor had taught me that better than any sermon. Power is a hand that holds steady while storms spend themselves. I will draft what needs drafting, I said, cutting through their debate as if it were fabric. You will sign when it is time. You speak as if you rule, the priest said. I speak as if I remember what she would have wanted. I took the ring back. Do you? They faltered, and in the falter there was my permission to leave. I returned to the witch before the palace could gather breath enough to try bravery twice. Her door opened before my knuckles reached it, as if I had become predictable to the house. She was already smiling, a cat who had heard milk being poured from 3 rooms away. The ribbon still slept on its nail. It would not sleep much longer. Well, she sang, stepping aside. I'll pay, I said. You will beg, she corrected gently, and that ruined me more than the threat. She began laying out instruments that were not instruments, bowls that remembered thunder, tongs that had learned a winter's patience, a mortar stained with red that had never seen a pomegranate. She moved like someone who had been taught sorcery by a disappointed grandmother and wanted to make that ghost proud. The lie must breathe to pass, she said, almost to herself. The pass must hold to count. Counting must be quiet to be believed. What do you need? I asked, though I already knew part of it. The ledger had not been coy. A keepsake, she said, lifting the black silk free. The ribbons sighed in her hands. You brought that long ago, clever knife. It knows her, it remembers you. And the price? I asked. She looked at me the way a wolf looks at the moment before it bites. Calm, inevitable, almost kind. Blood, she said. Not yours. I didn't answer. The scent must be truer than truth, she went on, as if we were discussing weather. It must be grafted from a living signature. The world does not open for thieves. It opens for kin. Bring me her blood. The room listened to the sentence after it was spoken, as if it had weight. It did. I felt it slide into the shape of the choices I'd already been making, a blade she was kind enough to name. She is dead, I said, because I am a man who likes to test walls before he climbs them. She is not yet gone, the witch said softly. And even when she is, there are threads in this palace that remember her better than you do. I thought of the brand under the wrap, the faint crescent sleeping in her skin. I thought of the women who washed her, the basin, the cloths, the little silver pins that closed what never wanted closing. I thought of what a ribbon learns pressed to a wrist in summer. The witch tapped the mortar with a fingernail. The sound was delicate and obscene. Bring me what I asked for, she said. If you want the storm to let you in dressed in another man's weather, it will cost you the truest coin. What will it make me? I asked. Believable, she said, and that is more dangerous than powerful. I looked at the ribbon. It didn't move. I looked at my hands, steady as prayers I never learned to say. I looked at the door, which offered me the mercy of leaving. I didn't take it. Very well, I said. Her blood. The witch's smile went out like a candle. In the new dim, she looked almost merciful. "Good boy," she said, and set a bowl between us that had been empty until I agreed. "Good boy," she said, and set a bowl between us that had been empty until I agreed. The sound of it followed me into the palace corridors like a bell I couldn't stop ringing. By dusk I had outwalked the whispering halls and gone down, past banners and armour, past the kitchens where grief hid in work, past the crypt lamps that burn steady when nothing else does. The tomb of the former king keeps its own weather, air colder than stone, silence thick as wax. His name is carved with the careful hand of a people who need their tyrants to look tidy once they're gone. I stood before the slab and spoke to it like a coward to a locked door. "You didn't curse her," I said. "You opened her." My breath smoked. The words didn't. "You taught her to drown men and call it love," I went on. "You taught her to want a partner who could carry the storm. You didn't make room for what happens when she finds him." The slab listened as well as any king ever did. "I'm taking what you'd deny me," I said finally, palms flat on cold marble. "And if a god is keeping score, he can come down here and argue with the stone." I left a mark of heat from my hands. It faded. Kings are good at pretending nothing touches them. I turned back toward the living and found memory waiting with a lantern. Sul came to her like prayer arrives in a room that has already decided to forgive. Thin scar at his temple, healer's hands, the kind of gaze that makes people confess sleep they never had. He bowed, not out of protocol but because reverence was how his body moved. When he straightened, he did not look at the court. He looked only at her. "Your Majesty," he said, and made the title sound like a promise to be gentle with the world. If Kyle was summer, and Ryan was winter, and Tor was a storm with teeth, Sul was the first bright hour after rain. The court breathed easier when they saw him. Fools always trust softness. In the chamber, smoke curled in pale braids. Sul took the perimeter the way a healer takes a pulse, counting, not controlling. When he stepped to her, he didn't reach. He offered his hands, palms up, and waited. She set her fingers in his. A simple acceptance that made the room lean in. The first movement was nothing more than interlaced hands and a shared breath. The second was the same, slower. He matched her pace without trying to lead, finding a cadence that treated each inhale like a vow and each exhale like its fulfillment. He spoke to her without words. "Are you here?" "I am here." "Do you want this?" "I want this because you do." Under that tenderness, a different pressure rose, the old awakening waking again. He felt it. I watched the knowledge climb his spine and settle at the base of his skull like an anointing. He didn't flinch. He softened further. He touched her the way temples ask to be entered. She allowed him to trace the line of a shoulder, the hollow where power keeps its secrets, the warm places where breath collects and waits to be spent. He moved with patience sharp enough to cut. The room warmed slowly, as if 1,000 small candles had been lit one by one. He let her guide every turn with something as small as the press of a thumb. When she paused, he honoured the pause. When she advanced, he went with her, unafraid of disappearing. He whispered her name once, not possession, worship. Pressure loves a steady surface. When it found Sul, it did not break him, it filled him. He began to tremble in the way strong men tremble when their strength is finally given somewhere worthy. His mouth learned a prayer I did not know the words to. His breath hitched and smoothed, until even the incense seemed to breathe with him. She didn't take his gentleness and crush it. She put a crown on it and told it to kneel. He knelt. Not because the ritual asked, because the only truthful place left to be was lower than the thing he adored. He pressed his forehead against her, as if he could pour his steadiness into her bones. She let him try. When he looked up, his eyes were bright as wounds that don't hurt yet. The room's heat grew devotional. No blaze, no frenzy, just a furnace set to the exact temperature at which metal yields and becomes shape. Saul's hands shook and then stilled. He kissed the inside of her wrist with a care that made even the walls watch their echoes. She gave him more because he asked as if he knew how to keep it safe. Time uncoiled. The right became a hymn. In, out, yes, yes. Fingers interlaced, hands loosening and returning like tides. He tried once, just once, to save her, I think. He gathered himself and gentled the cadence until a lesser storm might have slept. Under her pressure, his rescue melted into devotion. He wasn't soothing a wound anymore. He was choosing an altar. When the surge came, and it always came, it was not violent. It was complete. The air went thick and sweet. The circle brightened along its thin thread. Saul made a sound that was less a plea than a surrender written in breath. He leaned into her like a man stepping into light and finding it warmer than expected. When she held, he stayed. When she took, he offered. When she gave back, he wept. He fled only when the hymn ended, and the room remembered it had a door. He was still crying when he reached the corridor. Quiet, embarrassed, smiling as if pain had finally taught him something joy never could. The courtiers parted for him with the surprised tenderness people reserve for men who have just discovered their own hearts. He pressed the heel of his hand to his sternum as if to keep something inside from spilling. A woman asked if he was hurt. No, he said, voice ruined soft. That's the problem. He left a wet thumbprint on the lintel as he went. I watched him go and learned a thing I hadn't wanted to know. Love won't save her. Not Kyle's bright tenderness when it arrives late, not Saul's reverent devotion when it arrives true. Love consoles, love adorns, love kneels well. But the pressure that wakes in her is a sea with its own mind, and sentiment is a lantern you can carry only so far before the wind takes it. She needs ferocity that can stand upright inside the flood and say, mine, without raising its voice. By the time night settled on the palace like a verdict, I had decided which sins I could live with. The witch wanted blood. The spell wanted a keepsake. The lie wanted a man willing to tell it with his whole body. I'd already promised all three. Her rooms were guarded by women who'd broken every man who tried to break them. They stood for me because she had once let me stand for her. Inside, the air still remembered the scent of her hair, the clean edges of her oils, the summer notes the chamber never lost even in winter. On the dressing table, combs lay teeth up like small, patient traps. The looking-glass held a ghost that could not be startled. I opened the drawer where she kept ribbons. They were folded as if sleep were a habit. Blue for council days, white for mourning that never suited her. Black for nights when the court needed to be reminded it was prey. My hands knew which one before my eyes did. The black silk was thinned by fingers and pulse, a shine worn into it by the place it rested, the inside of a wrist that had once carried the former king's mark and learned to make marks of its own. I lifted the ribbon and it slid across my skin like a secret choosing its listener. "Forgive me," I said to a room that did not answer. On the table lay her little gold pin, shaped like a branch of thorn. I pocketed it because thorns are honest. In the basin, a cloth had dried stiff, the one they used to clean the brand when it flared in fever. A trace of colour darkened the weave. Not much. Enough. The witch had said the palace kept threads better than men do. I folded the cloth. I hid the ribbon. I left the room with my heartbeat, where my throat should have been. Down, then. Back through the cooled kitchens and the listening stones, back to the door that only opened for people who didn't mind paying twice. The witch let me in with the kind of satisfaction that makes predators hum. "You brought me a story," she said, eyes on my pocket. "I brought you to," I said, and set the cloth on her table. After a beat, I laid the ribbon beside it. The room warmed an inch. The little bowls on her shelves turned their mouths toward us like flowers. She touched the cloth with a fingertip and hissed, pleased. "Living memory," she whispered. and the wrist's shadow. That will do. And the price? I asked, though we had both already named it. She produced a blade narrow as a thought you aren't proud of. The drop that buys the door, she said, not yours. I looked at the cloth. I looked at the ribbon. I looked at the bowl that had been empty until I agreed to sin. The tomb guard's what I need, I said. The tomb guard's nothing from a man who speaks to stone, she answered, almost kind. Go, little knife. Bring me the last thread. I turned to leave and her voice followed, silk over steel. When you come back, she said, you won't smell like yourself. Don't forget who you are while wearing someone else. I know who I am, I said. Good, she murmured. Try not to enjoy it. The door closed behind me. The palace exhaled as if it had been holding its breath all day. I tucked the black ribbon deep against my ribs, where vows keep warm, and went to take what the dead had no more use for. The palace woke to drums that weren't ours. 2 provinces, red banners in the east, black in the marshlands, had decided grief meant vacancy. Riders came hard with news that tasted like smoke. Bakers shut their ovens. Smiths let iron cool. The city listened for a name and heard only argument. I stood before the council while the priest stacked empty threats like bad bricks. Excommunication, he hissed. Seizure. Tribute withheld. Tribute is kept, I said, when rulers keep breathing. They want a successor, the youngest councillor managed. They want a spine, I answered. A messenger stumbled in, dust in his teeth. The marsh, he gasped. They swear no tithe until a true alpha proves the throne is. I let the room boil and then lifted a hand. The quiet arrived like a blade sliding home. Send word, I said. Tell them there isn't a true alpha in this kingdom who kept their queen alive through the night. The chamber stilled around the sentence. Tell them I did. The priest made a strangled sound. Someone dropped a quill. The riders stared at me as if truth had just grown horns. I didn't wait for permission. I never had. You will ride the message yourselves, I told them. You will repeat it in the square. If they want peace, they can buy it with patience. And if they want war? A councillor whispered. I slipped the ring back onto my finger and let it gleam like winter. Then they can come see what patience looks like when it stops being kind. The room exhaled. The riders ran. And I let my mind turn its face to the past, because the future I wanted wasn't going to gift itself. Marek and Var arrived together, heat and frost under one banner. Marek was flame-given shoulders, quick grin, easy laugh, a hunger that introduced itself before he did. Var was winter's straight line, quiet, watchful, the sort of stillness that makes candles wonder if they're allowed to flicker. They had the arrogance of brothers who survived each other. They had a plan. Share the victory. Share the throne. Share the woman they mistook for a prize. They bowed in unison. It looked like choreography. The court loved it. In the ritual chamber, the circle shone like a thin moon. Marek approached first with hands ready, all impulse and appetite, a dance already halfway begun. Var followed as shadow follows flame, measured, precise, eyes reading what his brother didn't bother to see. The queen stood between them with the patience of a tide. Permission is the first step. She granted it with a glance. Marek's touch came first, reckless and sure. Var's hands arrived a breath later, exact and respectful. She let them think they set the pace. She let them build the first scaffolding of rhythm, a triangle of breath and body, wrists and shoulders and mouths, tracing patterns that complemented instead of clashed. For a moment, it was beautiful. Heat braided with chill until the room found a temperature it could pray to. I watched the harmony take root. Marek's laughter turned to panting that didn't laugh at all. Var's silence filled with meaning. They adjusted to each other as men do when steadied by a shared want. 2 wolves drawing the same sled, lines tight, snow singing. Her attention hovered between them, exact as a scale. Then she moved it, 1 grain's worth, toward Marek. It was almost nothing. Var felt it like a blade under the ribs. He leaned in to reclaim equilibrium. Marek felt that as a challenge. Their perfect cadence wavered. She did not correct it. She let the tremor roam. It found Marek's bright pride and Var's cold certainty, and set both to ringing. Jealousy is a better musician than love. Marek sharpened his pressure. Var refined his angle. Heat pushed, ice shaped. She allowed both. Her hands taught them terms without words. Here, slower. Yes, not yet. Marek obeyed until Var's restraint looked like superiority. Var obeyed until Marek's abandon looked like access. The rhythm split like a river hitting rock. They began to perform for her and against each other. The triangle became 2 lines, each man trying to be the one she matched. Marek sought to draw sound from her that only he could coax. Var sought to write a rhythm on her skin that only he could read. She gave them almost answers, equal parts mercy and lesson. The almost drove them mad. Marek reached for more and found Var's hand there first. Var yielded an inch and took 2. Marek laughed, a little wild now. Var smiled without showing teeth. The incense turned heady, the air thickened. The floor remembered it was stone. She did not raise her voice. She did not move much. She stood like a lighthouse and let 2 storms find out who needed land more. When she touched them both at once, 1 palm at Marek's jaw, 1 at Var's throat, the room forgot other languages. Marek shuddered as if absolution had teeth. Var's eyes closed like doors on a prayer. Their breaths found her pace for a count of 5. On 6, she withdrew both hands and looked away. Marek grabbed for her attention like a drowning man grabs for sky. Var held still, certain stillness would draw it back. The choice ruined them. Marek's heat turned manic. Var's cold sharpened into cruelty at the edges. Their synchronized hunger collapsed. In trying to outdo each other, they unlearned her. She did not break them. They chose to break. Marek pulled. Var resisted. The circle's line sliced the room between them. She stepped out of range and left them to their mathematics. Marek realized too late. Var realized just in time to resent it. They looked at each other and found not a partner, but a mirror. Mirrors are merciless. Marek stumbled first, reaching to claim what the ritual no longer offered. Var caught his wrist out of instinct or spite. It didn't matter which. The ritual isn't built for men touching each other without the center's blessing. The air went thin, the way it does when a candle eats the last of its oxygen. Enough, she said finally. Not loud. Final. They froze. Marek's mouth shaped a plea that never found sound. Var released his brother's wrist like it had burned him. The Queen walked past them both without a backward look, and the circle dimmed itself. In the corridor, Marek laughed the laugh men use when they've lost the only game they understood. Var straightened his cuffs, perfecting an order that wasn't coming back. They left together, not speaking. They never stood easy in the same room again. That was the night my patience died the easy death it deserved. I had watched pride burn, logic drown, brutality kneel, devotion weep, and now harmony devour itself. I had given fate its chance. Fate had squandered it. The kingdoms could riot and call it righteousness. Councils could hiss. Priests could bless their own fear. None of it altered the truth. No alpha deserved her. Not then. Not ever. I climbed the service stair to the witch with the kind of calm that frightens wolves. The lamp in her den was already lit. The ribbon lay beside the cloth in the bowl. The air buzzed like a hive that had learned my name. She eyed my empty hands. You owe me a thread, she said. I'll owe you 100 more before I'm done, I said. Start with this. I took the narrow knife she offered. It was colder than honesty. The bowl waited like a mouth. I didn't hesitate. Hesitation is a form of prayer, and I was finished praying. I cut my palm and let the blood fall, dark as ink, warm as a secret finally spoken. It struck the ribbon and the cloth and spread through them like truth. The den brightened without light. The scent rose, a layered thing, wild and royal, sun-warm and winter-cold, something that remembered rain and crowns and the inside of a wrist where vows sleep. I leaned over the bowl and whispered her name. The lie lifted its head and started breathing. The bowl breathed with a lie that felt like truth, and the room answered it the way wheat answers wind, by remembering it was made to move. I let the scent settle into me like a second pulse, then killed the lamp and climbed toward daylight. The palace was busy pretending to be devout. Priests multiplied like crows on a wall, all black cloth and hungry eyes. At the council chamber, the high priest had traded fear for theatre. He stood beneath the moon relief with his hands raised as if he were lifting the ceiling by piety alone. "Hear me," he called to the crowded hall. Our Luna was a sacred test. The alphas who failed were found wanting, for the realm's good. We must accept the lesson. Purity, not passion, protects the throne. The word purity clicked in my ear like a lock I was tired of. "You mean cowardice," I said, stepping into the circle of their attention. "You wrapped it in linen and incense and hoped no one would smell the rot." A hiss ran through the gathered, slender as a blade drawn from silk. The high priest lowered his hands without lowering his chin. "You dare speak of purity, Beta. You forged decrees in heat. You smell of the old rites and something worse." "Truth," I said. "Blasphemy," he returned. "The difference," I said, "is who bleeds for it." I left them their echo and walked away before anyone remembered they had a spine. If they wanted sermons, they could build altars to their own voices. I had other gods to offend. Ilias came back to me on the staircase, the memory of a man who wore light like a habit. He arrived to the ritual with incense that smelled like early mornings and new bread. He did not gaze at her as if she were breakable. He gazed at her as if he had finally located the horizon and intended to walk it forever. He carried vows coiled neatly in his mouth and did not speak them yet, because reverence properly kept waits until asked. The court stood a little taller when they saw him. Piety flatters cowards by borrowing their posture. In the chamber, smoke braided itself into pale ropes, and the circle shone thin and true. Ilias did not reach for her as Kyle had, did not measure her as Rian had, did not test her as Tor had. He merely bowed his head and whispered a prayer that asked nothing and promised everything. "Permission," he said softly. She gave it with a breath. His hands found hers as if his skin had learned the ritual long before his mind did. Fingers interlaced, palms aligned. He kissed the backs of her knuckles like a man tasting the edge of a chalice. When he lifted his eyes, there was certainty in them, the tender, dangerous certainty of the devout. He began with worship, not the loud kind, the kind that understands the power of quiet repetition. He traced small circles where breath collects. He pressed his forehead lightly to hers and matched his inhalations to the rhythm in her throat. When she paused, he paused. When she moved, he moved. Not following, not leading, but consenting to a cadence neither of them pretended to own. The room warmed the way churches do when candles have been burning a long time. Smoke wrote thin lines that even I wanted to read. Ilias whispered, not doctrine, not rules, but names for the parts of life men forget to bless. He named warmth. He named nearness. He named the courage to be touched without fear. He named her. He named her again. She listened, and in listening the pressure rose. Not like thunder, like a tide that has chosen a shore. Ilias felt it. I watched the flinch move through him and transform into awe. His lips parted on a prayer that became a sound, and the sound had heat for a spine. His hand steadied because trembling would waste what he had been given. He closed his eyes because seeing would be smaller than knowing. Purity is a brittle thing until it learns to bend. She did not break his devotion. She tempered it. When he tried to keep the pace sacral and slow, she gave him one heartbeat faster and watched his doctrine stutter, then catch. He tried to lift it back to the realm of air. She anchored it to the body with a single exhale in the exact wrong moment to stay holy. He followed, cheeks flushing like dawn finding a face. He spoke her name, and it grew teeth. Prayer turned to promise. I will keep this safe. Promise turned to need. Keep me inside it. He leaned nearer, careful, and found that care could be hunger stretched thin enough to sing. She cupped his jaw, and a man who had always knelt without shame learned that there is a kind of kneeling that is not submission, but completion. He made a sound I had only ever heard in temples when miracles are rumoured. He put his mouth to hers like a pilgrim drinking after desert. If the others had been storms, this was harvest. He offered her bread and she showed him wheat. He offered her water and she showed him river. He offered her light and she taught him fire, not as punishment but as truth. Desire is a sacrament when it refuses to lie about what bodies are for. The pressure rose again, not cruel, not forgiving, just inevitable. Ilias trembled with it, then through it, then to it, until trembling became a language his muscles spoke without shame. He said thank you with his hands, with his breath, with the slackening of his shoulders as he set down the burden of being good and took up the sweetness of being true. He broke gently, like a chalice that doesn't shatter but melts into something a hand can drink from. Tears caught in the corner of his mouth and he laughed at them the way saints laugh when they learn they are human in time to be saved by it. Thank you, he whispered as it ended. Thank you, thank you. He left the chamber barefoot, carrying his boots as if noise would be an insult. The court stared at his wet face and saw penance. I saw revelation. On the stairwell, with the memory still warm, I stopped asking myself the question that had kept my hands clean. Do I deserve her? What does deserving have to do with weather? The bowl's breath felt like a second heartbeat under my ribs. The witch's words followed, silk over iron. You won't smell like yourself. Try not to enjoy it. The high priest intercepted me again at the corridor's throat, courage borrowed from an audience. You shame the dead with your insolence, he snapped. You shame the living with your lies. You shame the living by letting them starve, I said. You shame the dead by calling their choices tests to make your sermons taller. She was a trial, he insisted, voice cracking. She was a woman, I said, so quietly the stones leaned in to hear. And you used her to frighten men into kneeling to you instead of to her. He raised his hand. It shook. Mine didn't. Go bless something that can't bleed, I told him, and brushed past. In my rooms I barred the door and set the bowl on the table where I had once kept maps. The ribbon lay black as a secret. The cloth had darkened where the drop had taught it a new language. The lie breathed in patient waves. I unfastened my collar. I washed the blood from my palm and let the sting remind me this would not be a story I could walk backward out of. On the chair, I laid the coat she had once teased me for, too precise, too sober, too beta, and left it there like a skin. The scent rose. It rolled over my wrists, my throat, the hollow below my ear where wolves read each other. It didn't hide me. It rewrote the air where I stood. I felt the world measure me and come up with a number it liked better. I let it. I let it because men had been walking into her chamber with numbers attached to their names for a year, and not one had understood what was being counted. The mirror didn't change my face, but the room did. Worthy, I told the reflection, and watched the lie smile. Irrelevant. I closed the bowl, sealed the breath inside the glass throat the witch had given me, dabbed the smallest echo along the path the world would smell first. My hands didn't shake. The lamp on the table guttered and steadied as if it had needed a decision from me to decide how to burn. When I opened the door, the corridor felt like a throat swallowing. There are moments that turn a man from one creature into another. Most of them arrive disguised as small doors. I walked through mine. The palace had gone quiet the way fields go quiet before night animals begin their work. Guards nodded and did not ask questions, because they knew whose questions I had already answered. The tapestries breathed, the stones remembered my step. The air changed as I moved, like reeds parting for a boat that had finally found its river. At the turn where her corridor began, I stopped and listened to the new thing inside my lungs. It beat against the ribs as if they were a cage, and it had learned the trick of locks. I lifted the vial to my throat one last time, a final stroke of weather, then set it away. Then I walked toward her door. The corridor held its breath like a choir awaiting the first note. The vial's ghost clung to my throat and wrists, a weather I had stolen and made mine. 2 guards looked up, saw what they were trained to see, and lowered their eyes, Alpha, aloud. The door recognized the lie before any mouth did. Wood is older than law. It shivered faintly as I touched it. Inside, the chamber wore darkness like silk. Curtains moved with a night breeze that wasn't there. Lamps waited, unlit, obedient. She stood by the window with only the moon to dress her. No crown, no jewels, just a woman whose shadow made the wall remember its purpose. Her head turned. The air altered. "Wrong," she said softly. Not accusation. Appraisal. A fingertip pressed to the world to feel where it wobbled. I didn't speak. The lie breathed through me like a second pulse. She crossed the floor without hurry, circling once, wolf slow, queen slow, taking the measure of the trespass I had become. The scent told her a story. I let it, and I didn't. Whatever it claimed for me, I held my ground and gave her only what was mine: steadiness. She came close enough that moonlight chose her eyes over mine. The smallest breath touched my mouth and returned. A question passed between us without verbs. "Wrong," she repeated, and then, worse for me, better for us, she smiled. "But interesting." The first touch was not hands, it was direction. She tilted her chin. I obeyed and didn't, a deliberate fraction. The space between our mouths shortened, lengthened, vanished, returned. We learned each other's margin of error. She sought the seam in the disguise. I offered it with the dignity of a door that intends to stay closed and will open when it chooses. "Who are you?" she asked, not rising, not soft. "Yours," I said. Truth, wrapped in trespass. The room warmed. Her fingers found my wrist where the stolen scent had set its flag. She pressed until the pulse answered, then slid her hand along the inside of my forearm as if reading a vow written under the skin. I kept my breathing calm enough to be believed and honest enough to be chosen. She watched my mouth until I forgot it was a mouth and remembered it was a promise. "Prove it," she said. The first answer was patience. I let silence become shape. The second answer was nearness. We stood so close even doubt would have had to turn sideways to pass. When her lips met mine, it wasn't conquest, it was recognition. The kind that starts in bone and travels outward until the air says yes. Heat gathered quietly, a tide unwilling to splash. I matched the pull of her, the slow press, the measured retreat. When she advanced by a breath, I received it and returned a breath. When she stilled, I let stillness speak. The scent mask did the crude work. The rest was mine. She tested. I held. She deepened. I steadied. She set an angle that said lead. I led one step and gave it back. The cadence we found was not gentle, not safe, but chosen. 2 hands on the same blade, learning how to cut without bleeding yet. When she took my wrist and set my palm at the small of her back, I understood. We would draw the map together. Her other hand rose to my jaw, holding me at a distance that changed with the weight of a single breath. Possession, then reprieve. Command, then gift. She taught with inches. I learned by not arguing with mathematics that had found its proof. The room's dark turned warm around the edges. I could hear the little sounds, the catch in her throat when I answered exactly on the count she hadn't spoken, the hush she made when my mouth left and returned at a place that had not been named yet. She pressed me to the wall with nothing but presence, and I let the wall remember what bodies are for, holding. Again, she said against my skin. I did, and added one measure. A stutter in the rhythm, deliberate, respectful, a dare she could pick up or put down. She took it, teeth flashing in a smile the moon didn't deserve to see. Her hand closed at the back of my neck and pushed me lower by a breath, then lifted me higher by the same. I understood. I matched. I mastered. Then I knelt. The floor was cold and instructive. I wrapped my hands around the curve of her hips like a man gripping the rails of a ship he intends to steer through a storm he respects. She didn't ask for reverence. She permitted it. When I looked up, her gaze was a weight I wanted to wear forever. Command, she said. I rose. I set her hands above her head on the carved post and threaded our fingers together so the order was ours, not mine alone. I chose a pace that would have broken pride, and it did not break her. She chose a change that would have mocked logic, and it mocked me beautifully until I learned a better math. We traded control like a chalice, sipped from it, poured it back. And when I said, now, she obeyed. It wasn't surrender. It was recognition of who could be trusted to keep the fire in the room from chewing through the floor. I moved us through heat the way a captain reads a reef in moonlight, by what doesn't show. She ran the storm into me and found out I was built for it. I opened a door inside the night and gave her back to herself on the other side. The court ghosted the walls in my imagination, all their little mouths open. I thought of them and didn't. This was ours. Her name left my mouth like a vow that had learned to walk. Mine left hers like a weapon choosing a wielder. We burned without spectacle, every grip earned, every pace negotiated, every surrender a decision neither of us would recant in daylight. The scent mask sang its lie. The bodies sang truth. Between them, a new language was born. At some point, the world fell away. There was only breathing and a pulse that refused to stay in one place. When she pushed me down again with the command of a monarch, and I took her with the reverence of a thief who intends to pay later, I understood the shape of our doom. Victory as a cage we lock together and swallow the key. Mine, she said, not loud. Yours, I answered, and the word turned into something that used to be a man. After, whatever after means when time dissolves, she set her forehead to mine and named me. Not with titles, not with law, with the word that binds storms. Mate, she breathed. It should have crowned me. It collared me. The weight of it closed around the throat like a chain engraved on the inside with promises that cut. I wore it gladly. I wore it knowing it would kill us. Outside the walls, dawn rehearsed its entrance. The room cooled by a degree that sounded like birds far away. We lay tangled in a geometry no cartographer would dare publish. I counted her breaths as if a god had put me on that duty and told me the kingdom depended on it. I deceived them, I said into her hair. The realm, the priesthood, the houses. I walked into your door dressed in a weather not mine. And, she murmured, I will confess it, I said, to your body, to the court that pretends to be listening, to anyone who thinks a lie is worse than letting you drown alone. Her laugh was low, a tide curling. Confess then, she said. Confess by staying. I did. All the words a man wastes on priest and parchment, I spent in the only currency that mattered here. Steady hands, exact pace, the kind of obedience that dignifies both giver and gift. I confessed until the lamps would have burned out if I had lit them. Morning arrived without asking permission. Light came in thin at first, then in a slice wide enough to find the bed. It put a pale blade across the sheets. Her fingers twitched in mine, still interlaced where I'd pinned them hours ago and forgotten to set them free. I kissed the small bruises on her wrists where our vows had held. She pulled me closer by the chain I'd chosen to wear. The light widened. It found colour. A bloom on linen where no bloom should be. Not scarlet for spectacle, but the sober dark of a truth that had decided to be seen. It spread slowly, a map of a country I didn't own, not mine. The room went quiet in the wrong way. I lifted my head. Her eyes were open, very calm, very aware. For one heartbeat I thought she would laugh again and call me dramatic. She didn't. "I know," she said. I sat up too fast and the world tilted. The scent mask wavered. The room remembered me. I pressed my palm to the place just below her ribs where breath had learned to falter when the storm rose too high. It fluttered and steadied and fluttered again. "We're all right," she whispered, which is what people say when they believe it for 1 second and want that second to last. I looked at the stain spreading like a rumour the truth envies. The morning threw another inch of light across it, mean as a clerk. "Not yours," I said, because I owed honesty the dignity of being named. "Not yours," she agreed, as if comfort were a game we were allowed to play. Footsteps moved in the hall, ladies ready with warm water and clean linen, and the gentle violence of help. The court would dress our night in ceremony and pretend it knew our names. I reached for the sheet and my hand came up painted. The door hadn't knocked yet. The cage had. The cage had. I stood long after the morning fled, watching her breath measure itself in fragile increments. The stain on the sheets had been stripped away by trembling hands, the chamber scrubbed, the maids sent out with lies they wanted to believe. She slept now, not fevered, not peaceful, something between something. I shut the door behind them and barred it. The ledger waited on the table like a throat that desired confession. I carried it to the light, opened to the pages sealed beneath false scripture, and found the handwriting I had come to loathe. The former king's private script, sharp, elegant, merciless. Not a curse, he wrote. An awakening. My pulse kicked once. The room leaned closer. I read. He had documented everything. Not battles, not policy. Her, inked across hidebound pages, diagrams of breath, excerpts of rites, maps of the body's thresholds and the moon's timings, observations of her hunger before she ever called it hunger. There were no apologies in his ink, only certainty. The old ways do not create need, they reveal it. I turned the page. Flashback before Luna, before throne, before storm. She was young, but not helpless, beautiful, but not yet dangerous. He watched her, wanted her, and named it destiny, because men like him never use smaller words. His love was the kind that comes with an altar and a lock. The rites began with fasting, not starvation, focus. Hunger sharpens instinct. She obeyed, trusting the man who promised she was chosen, believing chosen was a gift and not a direction. Then fever. Night after night he laid lunar oil across her skin, scented with winter flowers and iron. It coaxed her pulse into new rhythms, quickened her senses, opened the gates of instinct that most wolves never learn exist. When the fever took her, he stayed at her side, whispering the litany of the old tongue until her breath matched his. Then marking, not a brand of ownership yet, but a ritual of alignment. 3 crescent strokes, throat, sternum, wrist. His thumb anointed the lines while her eyes burned with questions she hadn't learned to ask. Her back arched under the moonlight, not in pain, not in pleasure, but in becoming. He called it devotion. She felt it as a door opening that she hadn't even known was locked. Then midnight lessons, where he taught her the oldest truth. Instinct is not chaos. It is a kingdom. A ruler untrained becomes a storm that drowns. A ruler awakened becomes a storm that obeys. She learned how to breathe not for calm but for power, how to yield not for defeat but for transformation, how to take and be taken in ways that bent the world around her. The king fed her warmth, breath by breath, and she drank it like prophecy. When she trembled, he steadied her. When she surged, he met her. When she opened, body, instinct, will, he guided her through each threshold with a voice that promised she would never be small again. His hands did not teach softness. They taught intensity. His mouth did not teach comfort. It taught hunger with direction. Her first awakening was not violent. It was inevitable. At the height of the final rite, she spoke his name as if it were fate, and he smiled, not as a lover smiles, but as a man who had just completed a masterpiece. "I have unsealed her," he wrote afterward. "She will never be tamed by a lesser man." He believed her desire was a weapon he alone could wield. He believed that made it love. Present. My hand hovered over the page. For the first time, I did not hate him. I hated what he took. I hated what he shaped. But I understood him. He hadn't awakened a mate. He had awakened a storm, and then chained his throne to it. And every alpha since had walked into that storm believing they were kings. I closed the ledger and laid my palm over the ink. The scent mask still lingered on my skin, a lie born from the knowledge he left behind. I had despised him for what he'd done. Now I was using the same methods. The realization didn't shame me. It focused me. Softness failed her. Pride failed her. Piety failed her. Strategy failed her. Brotherhood failed her. Even devotion failed her. Only understanding the storm had ever come close to holding her, and the dead man had understood it first. I shut the ledger. Her breath changed, not dramatically, a flutter, a skip, a stutter beneath her ribs. A shadow passed over her face, brief as a cloud over sun. I moved to her side. The bond between us, still new, still burning, surged with a heat that wasn't purely desire. Her body answered wrong. I pressed my hand lightly to her sternum. Her pulse fluttered again, too fast, then too faint, then too fast again. Her lids twitched with a dream she did not want. I whispered her name and she stilled, but the stillness frightened me more than the flutter. The king had written one final warning at the bottom of the page, in a line so thin it could be mistaken for ornament. Even an awakened star can burn its own sky. The bond was too strong. The intensity we shared, what she demanded and I met, had a cost. Every surge pulled at her heart. Every climax of instinct tore at the rhythm that kept her alive. Power hadn't cursed her. It was consuming her. Her breath stuttered again. I caught her hand. "Stay," I whispered. Not command, not vow. A plea. The cage had teeth. And now I could feel it closing on both of us. "Stay," I whispered. She did, for a while. But outside our door, the lie I had married to my skin began to leak like smoke through tapestries. By week's end, the priests were calling for annulment, the nobles for inquiry, the provinces for separation. Wolves gathered at the borders, raising banners not in her name or mine, but in hunger for the throne. Word spreads fastest when truth is afraid to speak, and rumour is not. The high priest stood before the people in the square and declared her bond contaminated. He spoke of violations, of deception, of impurity in the royal bed. He never said my name, but he didn't need to. The court had already drawn the line. If she could fall, then someone lesser must have caught her. The kingdom did what kingdoms do. It chose cowardice as a crown. I walked into the council chamber to the sound of nobles tearing each other apart with words sharp enough to draw blood. Maps lay scattered, wine spilled like battlefield sacrifice. Half wanted civil war, half wanted scapegoats. I wanted silence. "Enough," I said. They ignored me. "Enough." The ring on my hand struck the table and the sound cut through them like a blade. "You want a culprit?" I asked. "Fine. I deceived the realm. I wore a scent not mine. I entered her chamber and I did not leave. She chose me anyway." They recoiled as if honesty were disease. "And if you think I regret it," I said, "you have learned nothing about your queen." A murmur spread. Fear, shock, fascination. The priest tried to speak. I didn't let him. "You want annulment?" I asked him. "You think a lie is worse than a throne without a pulse? You think ink can unmake a bond that blood sealed?" He paled. Words withered in his throat. They didn't understand that even if they stripped every title from us, she would still be mine and I hers. The bond was a forest fire. The law was a bucket of water tipped into the wind. But love doesn't stop kingdoms from burning. Flashback before the riots, before the stain on the sheets, before truth learned to speak in daylight. There were mornings when we woke tangled in blankets and breath, her thigh thrown over mine, her hand curled at my collarbone as though she was anchoring herself to staying alive. We rose slow, only to fall into each other again, quick, hungry reunions that tasted like both home and warning. Her laughter lived in those mornings. It echoed off stone in a way that made me believe briefly that the world might forgive us. Routine formed itself around obsession. Passing touch became necessity. Goodnight became negotiation. Hunger lingered under every conversation, every council session, every bite of fruit, every glance. I could touch her wrist in daylight, and it felt like a promise I had no right to make. One night, breathless against my mouth, she whispered, "No more secrets. No more restraint. Swear it." "I swear," I told her. And I meant it. She made me promise I would never leave, never yield her to another alpha, never let the court or fate rewrite our story. I made vows men should not make if they wished to survive them. In those days, I believed love could be a barricade. Now I know love is a door, and sometimes it opens into ruin. Present. The council chamber dissolved into argument again. I walked out before my rage chose a throat. The guards followed in uneasy silence. Servants stared with eyes full of questions they feared to ask. I reached the throne hall just as the Queen arrived for council, dressed in winter silk, spine straight, chin lifted. Only I could see the cost in her breath. The high priest stepped forward to greet her, dripping sanctimony. "Your Majesty, the council must discuss the possibility that your bond—" She lifted her hand. He bowed reflexively, as if his bones remembered who ruled. She opened the session. Voices clashed, demands spat from every side. I stood beside her chair, a storm coiled in restraint. Her pulse beat too fast, her breaths came too shallow. Each surge in the argument made her flinch, not in fear, but in effort. She was holding herself upright by will alone. Then, something slipped. Not visible to them, visible to me. Her fingers gripped the arm of her chair. Her knuckles blanched. The bond flared, too hot, too fast, pulling at her heart the way the king's warning said it would. I reached for her wrist under the table. She clutched my hand once hard. Then she inhaled wrong. Her eyes unfocused, her body swayed. "My queen?" someone asked. She tried to smile, to soothe them, to lie for just one more minute. Then her gaze found me. Only me. Her lips shaped one word. "Sorry." And she collapsed. The hall erupted, chairs scraped, priests cried out, nobles choked on shock. I caught her before her skull struck stone, and the bond bucked against my ribs like a beast that feared the cage was closing forever. Her pulse fluttered. Once, twice, then fled. "Clear the room," I said. But the world was already falling. "Clear the room," I said, as she lay in my arms and the hall dissolved into panic. And it did, like a wave breaking backward. Guards hauled nobles through doorways, priests tripped over their vestments, the council forgot how to breathe and remembered how to run. The healers came fast, faces set to neutral the way soldiers polish blades. They listened to her chest, counted, listened again. Eyes flicked to me and away. "Reduce the bond's heat," the eldest said, "or it will take her heart." "She is not a hearth," I answered. "You do not bank her with ash." "Then she will die," he said, and did not add, "You will help." I gave him silence. She gave him less. "No," she whispered, lashes barely lifting. "We keep what is ours." "Majesty." He tried again. "Leave," I said, and this time the word carried the room with it. We were alone with the sound of her breath trying to remember its rhythm. That night began our experiments in restraint. We stripped the bed as if it were a battlefield that had committed a crime. We opened the windows. We set water where wine had been. We laid beside each other with an inch of air like a border that could keep a country whole. I folded my hands on my chest as if prayer ever worked for men like me. She turned her face into the pillow and exhaled the shape of a name. I did not touch her. She did not ask. We failed before the second hour, not with hunger, yet, with gravity. Her hand slid in sleep. My fingers answered. Our palms found each other and the bond sang a little, grateful to be allowed a note. I moved away until the mattress complained. She made a sound I had no prayer for. The next night we did worse. She sat with her back to the headboard and I knelt at the foot of the bed, as if distance could be formalised into safety. We spoke of maps, provisions, which houses would turn when asked and which would turn when paid. Strategy is easier than honesty. But the inch of air between us thickened into something that pulled. "Tell me," she said softly, "how you choose not to touch me." "I don't," I said. "I try. Those are not the same." She reached out, stopped halfway. The gesture hovered between us like a vow that didn't know where to land. "Almost," she said. "Let's live there." So we tried. We learned the cruel grace of hovering, hands held above skin until both of us shook, mouths a breath apart until our lungs invented new words for ache. I stole air from her lips without contact. She stole mine back. She turned her head, and I followed the movement like a pilgrim asked to circle the shrine without entering. The room warmed despite our obedience. The bond purred and then prowled and then pressed its nose against the bars of its cage. We lasted longer. We failed with tears. The following week we tried distance. I worked until the candles burned to wicks no one had the nerve to snuff. I bled the days dry of minutes and left the nights to choke on the remainder. She walked the gardens under guard and pretended the wind was enough. Servants whispered that absence had made us polite. Polite is a wound that blushes. That evening I found her in the North Gallery, gazing at the mosaics as if saints could learn from wolves. "How was restraint?" I asked. "Hungry," she said. "And you?" "Hungry," I said. We stood 3 paces apart until the floorboards started to sound like pleading. "Don't," she murmured, when I took the first step. "Don't," I echoed when she took the second. We met at the third and learned again that distance is only geography. Borders cannot rule weather. We didn't devour. We breathed each other like contraband, held a face between palms as if it were glass, pressed foreheads together until the ache dulled into something holy and unbearable. I counted her breaths out loud, steady as a drum for soldiers marching toward a war they won't survive. "Enough," I said at last, hating the word and using it anyway. She obeyed. The obedience hurt more than hunger. The healers kept returning with their arithmetic. "Cool the bond," they pleaded. "Stand apart, sleep in separate rooms, let the heat leave the walls." We tried. We failed. Every attempt at calm became another blaze lit by hands that trembled with care. We built rituals of denial, hands hovering, mouths hovering, breaths stolen at the last inch, edges held until our bodies shook with a sweetness that felt like dying and a dying that felt like sweetness. Release choked back, not out of prudery, but devotion. A penance that didn't fix anything and meant everything. The lesson the king had written in the ledger, the one I had pretended not to understand, kept repeating itself in us. Even an awakened star can burn its own sky. By the 4th week, the city learned our private weather. Bread ran out in the market faster than priests ran out of curses. 2 more provinces spoke the language of revolt. A captain I trusted sealed a gate without orders, and I promoted him twice for disobedience. The council asked me whether I intended to keep lying. I told them I intended to keep the queen alive, and if they found these were different tasks, they could bring me their courage in a bowl. That night, she slept without moving, the way exhausted animals sleep, as if anything stirring might be mistaken for surrender. I watched the flutter under her ribs and counted. At 40, it steadied. At 80, it stuttered. At 90, I whispered the old tongue I learned from a dead man's notes and hated him less for having known the words. The next evening, we made our last attempt at safety. We bound our own wrists, not together but to the bedposts, silk that remembered her pulse. The intent was a leash for our hands, a barrier our bodies would respect even when willpower failed. She laughed once, low and rueful, and it almost broke me. "This is a terrible mercy," she said. "We need one," I answered. "Then make it cruel," she said, "so I don't mistake it for kindness." I tied the knots as if gentleness were a sin. She tested them and closed her eyes, breathing hard, the way a runner breathes before a race he has already lost. I sat in the chair and watched her not reach for me. The ache built, and I rode it like a bad horse, speaking to it with the kind of patience I had learned on battlefields and never wanted to use here. "Tell me," she said after a while, "what you would do if I asked." "Everything," I said, and let the word cut. We lasted until the lamp died. We failed in the dark, because hope is braver when it can't see itself. I freed her wrists with hands that knew too well how to undo what they had made. We kissed once, twice, then stopped, shaking, heads pressed together like prisoners sharing a wall. The bond roared and we did not answer. I wanted to. She wanted to. We did not. We held the edge like a cliff with our toes over it and our hearts insisting on air. "This will kill me," she whispered, equal parts warning and wonder. "We will choose us," I said, and the sentence didn't ask permission. "I already did," she answered. In the morning, the eastern gate burned. The captain I had promoted sent a runner, enemy standards in the fields, a coalition of houses that had waited for our weakness and decided not to wait any longer. The council shrieked annulment as if ripping paper could turn back war. The high priest demanded she be cloistered for purity. I asked him which cloister had walls that could hold a storm. He pointed at the sky like a child naming a god who never answers. The decision came easier than it should have. We met in the ritual chamber where her first trials had broken kings in everything but name. The circle shone thin and patient. The air remembered poems we had not spoken yet. She stood across from me with her hair braided like a battle standard, and her eyes bright with the kind of calm people mistake for peace. "They will breach," I said. "They already have," she answered, meaning more than walls. "We can run," I lied. "We never have," she said. I stepped into the circle. The line hummed under my foot like wire ready to sing. The old ways were a door. We had always been keys. I reached for her hands and didn't take them yet. We had earned this almost. We had paid for it with nights that tasted like splinters. "Last stand," I said. "The old way," she agreed. We stood so close the air between us confessed. I felt the storm recognize us, and for the first time, it did not open its mouth to swallow. It bowed. Outside, horns sounded. Inside, we chose where we would be found. We stood so close the air between us confessed. Outside the chamber, the palace roared. Steel, fire, shouts, the stampede of a kingdom trying to tear itself apart before dawn. Inside the circle, there was only breath and the bond that had made a cathedral of our bodies and a battlefield of our hearts. The doors shook. The enemy had breached the halls. "They will reach us," I murmured. "They already have," she replied, touching my cheek with hands that had commanded legions and undressed kings. "But they will not take what we chose." I took her wrists gently, feeling the pulse that had begun to falter days ago, a candle trying to burn itself into starfire. She searched my face, not for fear, not for doubt, but for the vow I had never spoken aloud, that I would end where she ended. Moonlight crawled across the stone floor. The old circle brightened. The air warmed around us as if the storm itself had come to stand witness. "We begin," she whispered. "We end." I answered. We stepped into the circle together. Flashback present. Collide her lips met mine with no rush, no frenzy, just certainty. A vow, not a hunger. The final ritual was not like the others, because this time there was nothing to win, only something to finish. Hands met, not gripping, not clawing, interlacing, as though our fingers remembered the script older than language. Her breath poured into mine returned to her, a loop without beginning or end. The rhythm built, slow and sacred at first. Devotion, not desperation. A ceremony of bodies shaped by choice, not by heat. Her forehead rested against mine. Our breaths aligned. Our chests rose as one. The bond ignited. The room swayed with the force of it. Not lust, but magnitude. A tide that refused to ask permission. My hands moved to her hips, guiding, then yielding, then guiding again, trading command in a cadence that felt like temple rites. The kind whispered in old myths, where gods destroyed worlds just to kiss once more in the ashes. Outside, the battle reached the doors, metal on wood, splinters flying, shouted orders. But none of it touched us. There was only the ritual, our final one, our truest one. "Mate," she breathed. "Always," I vowed. The bond surged, too hot, and she trembled. I caught her, held her, anchored her through it. Not with dominance, not with force, but with presence. She clutched my shoulders, pulled me closer, not out of frenzy, but out of gravity. Our movements deepened, slow, rhythmic, ceremonial. A war and a wedding in the same breath, a claiming that asked nothing and took everything. Time bent. Breath became prayer. Skin became scripture. Then, the shift. Her heart faltered. She gasped, fingers tightening on my back. I held her face in both hands, foreheads pressed, breath stolen and returned in the same beat. "We can stop," I whispered. "No," she exhaled. "We finish. I refuse to live half-bound." Her body shuddered, not in fear but surrender, not erotic, eternal. I wrapped my arms around her as the bond reached its apex. Light bloomed behind my eyes, white, blinding, endless. We clung to each other as though letting go would unmake the sky. The doors finally gave way. Flames gusted inward. Shadows of blades flickered on the chamber wall. She held my face. I held her waist. We did not look away from each other, not once. The bond climaxed like a star collapsing. Her breath hitched. Mine followed. She exhaled my name, a final vow wrapped in sound. I felt her heart falter under my hand. "No," I breathed. "It's all right," she said, smiling. Soft, serene, victorious. We were never meant to live small. Her body gave out in my arms. I pulled her against me, holding her upright as though posture could deny death. Heat left her slowly, like sunset draining from a horizon. I pressed my forehead to hers and let the bond finish its final cruelty and its final kindness. The flames grew, smoke crowned us. The enemy stepped into the doorway, but none dared cross the circle. Not when they saw our ruin. Not when they saw our peace. I held her until my breath began to thin, until my own pulse staggered to match hers. If she was leaving, I would follow. If she was still, I would be still. "If there's another life," I whispered into her hair, "we burn slower." My vision dimmed. My grip never loosened. I curled myself around her, head to her chest, arms unshaken, body a shield she no longer needed, but I would not take away. The smoke crowned us. The storm went quiet. And as the world dissolved, I gave her the last truth I had left to give. "You broke 7 alphas, my queen. You didn't break me. You finished me."